very short talk today. I think it's just sort of 15 slides or so, just to give you an overview of what the say-do gap is and how we approach research, and hopefully some general learnings that you might be able to take forward to your day-to-day practice when you speak to clients and that type of thing. So thank you for your time. So I'll start off with an example, hopefully some of you might be familiar with, you might have heard of it before, to try and demonstrate what we mean by the say-do gap, and then I'll give you a bit of an overview of some of the themes in the book and with a couple of examples. So research can mislead us if we approach it the wrong way. So some of you might be familiar with the case study here. Anybody willing to put their hand up? Have you seen this case study before? Tropicana, 2009. A lot of you probably weren't born in 2009. Okay, we've got one or two tentative hands up. Brilliant. So Tropicana changed their packaging in January 2009 for their pure premium juice, and sales fell instantly by about 20%. So after 2 months, they were down about £30 million. So you could see on the left-hand side the original packaging, and you could see on the right-hand side the new packaging. So Tropicana had researched this change to the new designs. They had spoken to people and got their feedback, and people had fed back on the aesthetic merits of whether they liked it or not, whether the new logo and the new font was attractive and that type of thing. And they'd used that evidence to then go on and do the launch. Unfortunately, what they didn't realise that customers, when they're in the supermarket, couldn't find and locate the brand easily on shelf. So where people are sort of going down, pushing their trolley down the aisle, scanning the aisle quickly to see if they could find their brand, they couldn't find it. So the research they had done into people's attitudes gave them some feedback, but it didn't answer the right question. What they should have done is something like a glance test or a shelf test or a recognition test to understand people's real behaviour to see if they could find the packaging on shelf. If you look at the changes, quite a lot of the cues had changed at the same time. So the logo went from horizontal to vertical. The main image of the orange was taken away, and quite a few of these cues simultaneously were removed. So people were a bit at sea when they were in the store. So they went back to the old design. So it's quite an unusual example of where they've gone back to an old packaging design, which I'm not aware of happening in other instances. So it's interesting for us because research was used, but the wrong type of research, and it's a reminder you've got to use the right method to get to the right answer for your purposes. And it kind of illustrates what we're sort of here today to talk about. So the limits of traditional research can be quite clear. So what people say isn't always the same as what they do. So often it's different, not always, but often. And you can see from this wonderful chart that I've stolen from Shutterstock, there's a gap between what people say and what they do often. So if we use a behavioural lens, we can get closer to the truth. And I'll talk to you a little bit about how in a second. So some of the principles of behavioural science underlie this say-do gap. So some of the foundations of human decision making. And you might not be able to read these words at the back, but 4 key principles that I would sort of say are the foundation of everything that behavioural science has told us. So firstly, you'll be familiar with quite a few of these, I'm sure, but firstly, we rely on intuitive thinking or automatic system 1 thinking far more than we're aware of. So we don't think the way we think we think. We're not in this rational, evaluative mind frame all the time. Often our processing is automatic. Secondly, because we're making thousands of decisions every single day, we have to use mental shortcuts to help us get through our day. So we wouldn't even leave the house in the morning if we were to rationally evaluate everything that we did. So if we take it to the supermarket example that I talked about before, like a medium-sized Tesco has got like 45,000 SKUs or products in it. Typical visit is like 50 minutes. So if you were to rationally evaluate in turn every single item, it'd be 900 items a minute, and nobody shops that way. We all rely on mental shortcuts. We push our trolley through a similar a destination, and we pick up the same 20 or 25 things using peripheral vision to scan the shelves, and then stopping and evaluating and going to that rational mode as and when we need to. Third principle there is that these shortcuts are prone to predictable patterns of error. So that's all the stuff about cognitive biases you'll have all read about in sort of marketing press. And the last one is that context is incredibly important to decision making. So if I quite happily pay £3.50 for a Starbucks coffee in the train station, yeah, I'll sort of question the value of a 20-serving sachet of that in Sainsbury's when the context is different. So different context and different perceptions of value for the same item, so to speak. So they're the 4 principles that we keep coming back to, and why there might be a difference between what people say and what they do, and that influences what we'll talk about in a second. So in terms of applying it to our daily practice, I was just going to go through some of the sort of themes in the book, and there's 4 or 5 chapters in here, and they just got different headings which help sort of bring it to life, and you can take away and have a look look in detail at yourself if you're interested. So there's sort of 4 themes that I wanted to talk about as we go through this were, firstly, defining the behaviour. So what kind of question is it, and what should we do? How can we translate that into objectives? Secondly, observation as well as asking. Thirdly, experimenting and testing rather than just asking people's attitudes. And then lastly, applying different methods to get to an overall view rather than just relying on one thing. And I'll go through these in turn and tell you a little bit more about them. So, the first one is around what kind of question is it as we're defining the behaviour, defining the research question. The first step was kind of trying to stop and pause and think when we get a client brief and break it down. So like if it's a really simple question like, what proportion of the people in the UK eat cheese or something, that's like a simple question. It's very discreet. It's really easy for people to reflect on and give an honest answer. So it's highly appropriate just to kind of throw that into a survey, and that's fine. Don't need to overcomplicate it. But if it's more complex, so something around like how does merchandising affect sales of a certain product? That's a really complex question. It's multi-layered. It's very context dependent, depending on what kind of the person, their situation, and the product. And you have to approach it obliquely rather than directly, because people don't have introspective access to the correct answer. So back to shopping, people are in this automatic mindset when they're shopping. They're not in the realm of conscious, rational thought a lot of the time. So they could give you an answer, but it might be incorrect and lead you to the wrong conclusion. It would be misleading just to ask people directly in that scenario. So by way of an example, I'll bring it to life a bit. The first step we often take when we get a client brief is to try and really define the behaviour and look for the human problem hidden within the brief. And I'm talking about another FMCG example. This applies to all sorts of behaviours and all sorts of context, online and offline. So this was a project we did for the cereal brand Weetabix, which you'll be familiar with. So they sent us a brief, and it was all about how we can use in-store tactics to increase sales. So nothing to do with advertising or marketing outside of the store. It's all to do with the in-store environment and the promotional environment and the way that the packs appeared and the merchandising and the shelves and all that stuff. So it was a bit of a head scratch, and we're like, well, what levers do we pull and how do we approach it? So that evening we went home and popped into the local supermarket, and it became a bit clearer. So I don't know if you see what I see here, but it's like a 10-foot wall of colour. There's boxes packed high, left, right and centre. There's a million different choices there. It's very complex. It's really hard to make a decision, like decide what to buy. We've got the heroic shopper here with her free-range toddler who's picking things up and putting things down. She might be double parked outside. There's a lot going on. It's a bit difficult. And when you went into that environment, it became very clear that the promotions that were being applied again were quite complex. So there was 2 packs for £4. There was 48 biscuits for the price of 36. There was rollbacks because it was Asda. And we saw people literally get their their phones out and get their calculators out on the phone to try and work out which is the best value of pack to do. So can't find the Weetabix, and when you do find it, it's hard to buy because you don't know what the value is. So trying to translate this ethereal business objective, which is quite sort of helicopter view and overview, in-store tactics to increase sales, into a human problem. How do I find it on shelf? How do you make it easy to buy? So trying to kind of use your gut to kind of go back to the human problem. That's the first thing we try and do. So that's all about context. And then in terms of approaching research problems, the first thing we try and do is observe as well as ask. So this links to the kind of contextual problem, but it doesn't matter if you're working on an ISA platform for a new ISA product online, or you're working for a town marketing a town, and you might be working for Guinness or a music store or whatever it is. The best thing you can do is get close to that context and spend time with the people who are in that decision-making process as they do the thing. And as researchers, one of our most powerful methods is called ethnography, which is a kind of posh word for observation. So just spending time with people, in a given context, exploring that behaviour and letting them set the agenda a bit, letting them do what they do. And by that whole process, we leaving participants room to set the agenda. We kind of discover and reveal an unknown. So we kind of find out things we didn't know that we needed to answer and ask, really. So there's a nice quote here that I like, which is, a desk is a dangerous place from which to view the world. I think it's a John le Carré one. And we live in this Zoom world at the moment, where you have, everything online, a lot of research sessions online, we meet people online. But getting to that context is the most valuable thing that we find as researchers. So if possible, even if it's building it in, just a tiny bit of observation is going to take you a long way. We'd always recommend it. The second point is around sort of approaches to how we approach surveys. So often it's about choices and trade-offs, not just stated attitudes. So getting people to make choices and recreating context are the kind of ways we try and do this. So you could do this by the way that you frame questions. So rather than just out of context, would you buy this? Or on a scale of 1 to 10, are you likely to do this? It's trying to kind of put the context and framing in there correctly. So for example, you're buying the ingredients for a Sunday roast and you've got a £10 budget. Which of these products would you buy? So again, it's that context. You're bringing the person back into a situation. They're thinking about the trade-offs they might make in real life, and that's far more powerful. Secondly, researchers have loads of what they call indirect methods that are like statistical ways of trading things off that we use, things like conjoint and max diff. That's the technical terms, but essentially it's just using different scenarios to make people choose A over B and then get them to do another one, and over 20 iterations or 10 iterations on an online survey, you get to what drives decision making. So factor A might be twice as important as factor B. And these types of tools are really useful to get to real behaviour and real choices rather than just do you like this and focusing on attitudes. So you guys will be very familiar with this bit, so testing and A/B testing, and so any kind of live test we love because it focuses on something that people are making an active choice in reality. So if we're examining the difference in conversion rate on a web page, we could go out and ask people whether they like the green version over the red version, but we're better off just having two versions run in parallel live, isolating a single difference, and then looking to see how people behave in real life. And you guys obviously be really familiar with this. So keeping every variable the same except one, and then seeing how it pans out over time. We can also apply this within a survey environment. So the term we use for this is monadic testing, which is a posh way of saying just testing independently rather than in sequence. So keep everything the same, change one variable and have different identical sample cells look at things. So this is an example of a control version of a letter versus 4 test versions with 4 identical sample cells. And we're just tweaking one variable each time, changing one aspect of letter design. You can see very clearly that if you pull a couple of levers, you're going to get a far better response. So incorporating this real choices into that people can make within a kind of survey is going to help sort of isolate the drivers of behaviour rather than just asking people attitudes, really. And so the final bit is just about triangulation. So it's kind of crude analogy here, but like shining a light from different angles or like using different sources to kind of converge is going to bring together a far clearer signal and allow you to give your clients far better advice. So whatever methods we use, we want to be focusing on the A, B, and C. So attitudes, context, and behaviour. So they're the 3 things that we always try and do, and always trying to overlay in order to give our clients the best advice. So certain simple examples like, what proportion of the UK population eat cheese, you don't need to go mad on, but certain things which are a bit more complex, as we said before, merchandising affecting sales, we might want to overlay all of these things. So by way of example, if I bring it back to the Weetabix example, we'll start with a C first. So we started with the context. So we went to have a look in store because we're really interested on like how are we going to kind of get people to buy more cereal, and that's where we got our hypothesis about making it easier to find on shelf and easier to buy. Threw some cameras up in store, obviously got permissions, and did 3 or 4 days of in-store filming and just measured the dwell time at the fixture. So the client had a view that people take about 20 seconds to make a decision, but you stick cameras in and then you analyse that data. I think the average time was over double that, so that's quite an important piece of evidence for them. And not only that, for certain categories it was far longer. So like treat category, like, you know, if you're having people over to stay for the weekend and you get some like posh granola or something you don't buy very often, people were staying in that aisle for like a minute and a half, 2 minutes to decide. So requires different tactics, and all this was quite new information for them. Eye tracking you may or not be familiar with, but it's essentially just glasses which measure where you're gazing at as a shopper. So people did that for us, and it made very clear which promotional tactics in store they were looking at and which were less useful and not really good return on investment. And then the other point on behaviour was around purchase data. So we looked at Kantar data, shopping trends over 12 months, what stuff was getting bought more, what was less, where the switching trends were going from one brand to another. And then all of that was overlaid with a big survey to say, okay, well, how do people buy cereal, what flavours are popular, what are the trends, and that type of stuff. And you put all that stuff together and we can come with a very, very detailed combined response into developing interventions to encourage people to buy the brand in question. So our goals here, our human objectives, to make it easier to find, easier to buy. So align all the promotions, so you just have one promotion, it's 2 for 4. Clear packaging, take all the extraneous material off the packs, no competitions, no other else, just the big logo and the yellow with a different flavour variant, so it's easy to see and identify. And then merchandise it together, so you walk into the cereal aisle, all the Weetabix is together in a block of yellow, and you know that the Weetabix is there, it's dead easy. You don't separate your protein into your protein cereals, you don't separate your minis into the mini cereals. All in one place, as simple and unmistakable as possible. Bring that together, this simplification strategy led to record market share for our client Weetabix. So it's one that we're proud of because it used all the different tools and it was different for what people said and what people did, and we gave them strategic advice. So aligning all those things, it can work well. So that's pretty much it, and I think I wanted to just finish on this quote here, which you'll be familiar with. So the problem with market research is that people don't think how they feel, say what they think, and they don't do what they say. So it's not a new thing, this. David Ogilvy said this, I think, in 1963 or something like that. Somebody can Google it to tell me the precise date, but it's well over 50 years ago. So we've known this for a while, and I think researchers necessarily haven't sort of leaned into it. It's quite easy just to ask attitudes on a survey. What I think is that behavioural science is kind of sort of, as it's grown in momentum over the past 15 years, it's emboldened researchers. It's made them think a bit harder. And I think this whole consideration of overlaying observation of real behaviour alongside attitudes and context, the ABC, that's the one thing to remember, that'll get us closer to the truth. And it doesn't matter if you're looking at a supermarket fixture or a web page or whatever it is. If you remember the ABC, that's my advice. Thank you for your time.